We have traced the threads of truth through sacred texts and cosmic philosophies. But what happens when those teachings leave the page? When wisdom stops being something we read and becomes something living, breathing, pulsing beneath our feet. Today, we step out of the library and into the forest. We move from the quiet contemplation of symbols into the wild, embodied language of drumbeat, breath, and earth. Not as two different paths, and not as opposing systems, but as two expressions of the same ancient intelligence. Hermeticism and Shamanism, the mind and the body, the principle and the pulse, the map and the movement, working together as one alchemical process. This is the episode where those two worlds finally touch hands. Welcome to a Spiritual World podcast, a space where we explore the vastness within and around us, a place to remember that you are a spiritual world within a spiritual world, the mind within the mind of the all. Here, we journey beyond programming, past the pain, and into the true essence of our sovereignty. My name is Toria, and my sole mission is for you to find the guru within and remember yourself as the creatrix of your world, embodying the power within you to build a life you love. As always, you're encouraged to go back to episode 1 for the full disclaimers on the terminology of mystic psychology. I am not a medical professional, and nothing shared in this podcast is intended to replace professional medical or mental health care. The term mystic psychology is not used in a clinical or medical context and has no connection to the medical field or industry. It is a spiritual and energetic framework rooted in the ancient wisdom and sciences of Hermeticism, intended to support self-exploration and inner awakening. If you are seeking medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment, please consult a licensed medical or mental health professional. Everything shared here is based on my own personal lived experiences and energetic perspectives, offered in the spirit of empowerment and remembrance. Please take what you need and leave the rest. I am honored to walk beside you as a channel, a guide, and a fellow traveler as we continue on this path together. Welcome back into a Spiritual World podcast, where today we are stepping into the ever intertwining teachings of Hermeticism and Shamanism. And as always, we have and welcome all benevolent beings that are assisting us at this time, with our usual emphasis that the Mantis frequency supports and transmits their experience and knowledge through this episode in various forms. So today, we'll start with our foundational theme of Hermeticism, because this is the part that gives us the layout of everything we're experiencing in this human journey. Hermeticism, to me, is not a religion, and that might be because it's so old and ancient that humans have not been able to really get their hands on it to dogmatize it. And at the same time, Hermeticism may not even be a belief system. Instead, it's more like an instruction manual for how the universe actually works. It's the mental architecture, the part that helps you understand the invisible patterns shaping your life. When I say Hermetic principles, I'm talking about those deeper truths that explain why. They explain why you keep repeating cycles, why certain people trigger the same wounds, why your healing opens and closes in certain seasons, and why your internal world affects absolutely everything on the outside. Hermeticism gives language to all of that and so much more. Take, for example, all of its foundational principles. Mentalism, the idea that everything starts in consciousness. If you have ever healed something internally and suddenly the outside of your life has been rearranged, that's mentalism in action. My nanny always said that if you have a messy house, you probably have a messy mind. And it absolutely makes sense to me, especially the more sensitive I become to my own frequency and the different layers of my conscious and psychological and just psyche being. And then we have correspondence, that as within, so without principle. Your inner world and your outer world are talking to each other constantly. They are seamlessly connected, and your patterns show up everywhere because they are trying to get your attention. Vibration? Nothing in your life is stuck, even when it feels stuck, even when you feel yourself hitting that wall over and over and over again. And trust me, I've been there. However, everything is still moving, shifting, and vibrating. This is why small energetic changes can lead to big emotional releases. And polarity, the understanding that opposites are actually the same thing at different degrees. Love and hate, courage and fear, expansion and contraction. They cannot exist without each other. Healing is often just moving along the spectrum instead of trying to escape it. And what about rhythm? The rise and fall, the ebb and flow. It reminds me of the ocean and the tides and the waves. If you have days where you feel aligned and days where everything collapses, you're not failing. You are living out a principle. And then cause and effect, where nothing is random. Not your triggers, not your trauma responses, not your breakthroughs. Everything has a root. Everything is timed perfectly. And last but not least, we have that gender. Not literal gender, more generational, and the balance of energies. The part of you that listens and receives, as well as the part of you that takes aligned action. All of this together is the mental blueprint. Hermeticism helps us understand the why behind our patterns, the mechanics behind our emotions, and the architecture behind our consciousness. It's the part of the journey where everything finally starts to make sense. And yet, as powerful as understanding is, it can sometimes still just be understanding. It can still just stay in the mind if you don't take it further. Remember, the mind inside the mind of the all. What a beautiful reflection to open up thought to. Hermeticism can help you see the map. to help you move through the phases of that mental alchemical landscaping into the physical, into the emotional and the spiritual and the sexual and all the different layers of our being. This is also where shamanism comes in. Because shamanism is the part of the journey that helps you move through these realms in different languages. And while you have to have an understanding of what's going on in your head, shamanism is definitely the part of a journey that gets me back into my body. Grounding. Being able to look at myself in the mirror and see me. Actually feel like I am in this body instead of somewhere else. You ever get that moment where you're like, for me, a lot of times it's like when I look at my tattoos, or I just happen to like look down maybe at my left, arm or my right arm while I'm driving or doing something, and I just look down and I'm like, that's me. That's my skin, that's my tattoo, that's my body. That is me in this moment. And I feel connected, right? I feel like my higher self is coming down and settling inside of my physical form and owning it and enjoying it and loving it. And I think for the majority of my life, everything's been out of body because I've never felt connected to my body the way that I have since joining this journey of the soul. And shamanism has been with me every step of the way. It has given me answers and processes and procedures and techniques that have aided all of my foundational understanding and knowledge of Hermeticism and prophecy. It has helped me turn understanding into expansion so I can reach the next levels. And that's what we're doing today, right? We're going to level up and understand how Hermeticism and Shamanism run parallel. And so now that we've talked about the mental blueprint, we're going to move into the part of the journey that lives in the body, that lives in the breath and in the energy field. And that, my friends, is where we invite in shamanism. Shamanism, to me, is an embodiment piece. It's the part of the healing path that maybe doesn't necessarily care how many insights that I've had or how well I can explain my childhood patterns or how many times I've decoded the wound. Instead, shamanism asks, okay, I see that you see this, but can you move it? Because understanding without movement becomes stagnation. And movement without consciousness becomes chaos. We need both. And this kind of makes me circle back to, messy life, messy mind, messy house concept. If I get stagnant, I'm pretty sure that I can see my laundry not being done or my bed not being made or my stairs, on the left-hand side filling up with things that I need to take up and put away. Right? Can anybody else relate? I know you can. Shamanism is the universal system humans discovered long before there were books or teachings or written philosophies. Across every continent, and every culture and every period of human existence, people learned how to step out of ordinary reality and communicate with the deeper layers of existence. The shaman is the one who navigates the upper world where guides, teachers, and celestial intelligence lives. The middle world where our physical reality overlaps with its energetic counterpart. And the lower world, the place of roots, ancestors, primal memory, the subconscious, and the original blueprint of the soul. These are all also very familiar, aren't they? They sound like different levels that we would walk through when performing alchemy. And what's really beautiful is that none of this requires belief. It's not always just about faith. It's about experience. It's about entering a different state of consciousness and interacting with the multiverse directly. Where Hermeticism lays down these principles behind the reality that we live in, Shamanism teaches us how to walk through all of the different doorways that surround us, seen and unseen. Shamanism uses tools such as rhythm, breath, sound, drumming, chanting, trance, nature, symbolic vision, and intentional altered states. And those intentional altered states can be completely organic and natural, as well as a lot of the popular mind-altering substances that we see helping people on their spiritual journeys. These aren't performances. They are technologies, ancient ones, designed to help the soul move, release, retrieve, and rebalance. To me, shamanism is that moment where the healing finally drops from the mind into the nervous system, where stored energy starts to unravel, where emotion has permission to move, and where the subconscious stops hiding, where the inner child, the protector, the shadow, they all finally have space to speak, and they are all seen and heard and feel validated. And this can look different for each individual on their path. For me, the times that shamanism has been so integral has been the revealing of deeper information for me. It's the depth of understanding that allows me to remove my bindings and whatever it is that I have allowed to hold me in bondage. Hermeticism brings awareness, and shamanism brings release. Hermeticism gives structure. Shamanism gives breath. Hermeticism explains the architecture, and shamanism walks you through the rooms. This is why when someone has been working on themselves for years, but feels stuck, usually it's because they've been doing all the insight work and not enough of the embodiment work. And I say that with love and experience, because I lived there too. And sometimes I still have to remind myself to move. My journey is not perfect. I'm sure it is actually seamless, although sometimes it doesn't feel that way. I definitely love to see what's going on in the mind, to understand the mystics of the psyche and those patterns and the architecture and where they come from and how they got there and what they can do. And as someone that was trapped in I'm trying to, I don't want to say the word, but I feel like, okay, in a horrific mental landscape for years, to finally be able to understand it. It was shamanism that gave me the first real glimpse into the psychosis and into the deep understanding of it. It was shamanism that gave me the visual of me pulling my own body through the streets with my head split open, and me realizing that it was my higher self coming down and going to war with me and breaking open my mind to understand deeper, longer, darker, so I could transmute it into the light. Understanding the wound doesn't empty it out of your body. Shamanism and its movement does. And I'd like to preface that it doesn't necessarily mean physical movement. I'm not talking about just rain dances or nature dances or any type of wild ecstaticness, like cacao ceremonies, right? Those are phenomenal. However, some of my most pivotal shamanic moments have been me in complete stillness. So when shamanism and Hermeticism come together, real transformation begins. And what's really great is sometimes maybe you don't even see that you are practicing or indulging or walking the path of both, of all of these teachings that we've discussed and more. That's what this season's about. Now, this is where the magic really shows itself. Because when you put Hermeticism and Shamanism side by side, you start to realize they are not separate paths at all. They are two ways of describing the same universe. Two angles on the same truth. Two languages for the same experience. Two maps for the same multi-dimensional terrain. So let's walk through those parallels, slowly and simply, so you can feel how naturally these two systems speak to each other and speak within you. Hermeticism says the universe is mental, which is really funny because I've got this like notion in my head, like the universe is mental, yo. Right? Like, yep, we can all agree. Anyways, meaning everything begins with consciousness. Everything is shaped by awareness. The mind isn't just in your head. I don't believe that I believe the mind is connected and, feeds into this physical portion of my head. But I also think the mind feeds into the entire body and the being, and it's more like a field around you. I kind of look at the mind like an oversoul in a sense. right? Because if we have those layers, the mind within the mind of the all. So that to me is like, soul within oversoul, and just another layer of how intricately designed we are. But the mind isn't just in your head. The mind is the fabric of reality. And what does the shaman do? The shaman journeys through consciousness. They shift states. They move between worlds and access knowledge and healing directly from the non-ordinary. The Hermetic adept studies the mental nature of the universe. And alchemically, they do travel through it, right? How else would we become the amazing philosopher's stones that we are? The shaman does the same thing. They travel through it in different context, different concept even. And the closer we get to dissecting these, the more that we understand that, yes, they are parallel. However, they are one and the same. Kind of like our DNA strands, right? Our DNA strands are so itty bitty. However, they have so much in them. And this is just like that. That's what I'm being shown in my head, is like a DNA strand. And it's one strand of the DNA. And like the bottom is red and the top is blue. And the bottom portion is, Hermetics or Shamanism. And the top is the other. Same truth. Different expression. So as above, so below. It's not just a metaphor, right? We know that it's a structure. Hermeticism gives us the physical plane, the mental plane, and the spiritual plane. Shamanism gives us lower, middle, and upper world. Different names, same house. And when I mean house, I mean you. Like, it's all of that is in you. The upper world in shamanism mirrors the spiritual plane. The middle world mirrors the physical plane. And the lower world mirrors the subconscious and archetypal layers that Jung so fluidly and so brilliantly transmits throughout our psychological history. The levels Hermeticists would place within the mental plane. They are describing the same vertical reality, the same ascending and descending ladder of consciousness, just from two different cultural lenses, two different perspectives, right? It's how all of us have our own perspective of the exact same experience, and they're all accurate. Hermeticism teaches that nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. In shamanism, vibration isn't a concept, it's a technique. The drumbeat isn't just a sound, it's a vibrational engine. It shifts your brainwaves into a state where the soul becomes movable. Chanting, rattles, breath work, even just burning of sage or pine, or even essential oils. They all have a vibrational frequency. These aren't rituals for performance. They are tools for altering the vibrational field. Where Hermeticism names the principle, Shamanism helps us apply it even further. Hermeticism says every opposite is just two ends of the same spectrum. I personally, yes, 100% agree with that. But I also love looking at it as a circle, right? Ever connecting, ever fluid, ever existing, infinite. In the ways that we can experience these so-called opposites: light and dark, fear and courage, contraction and expansion. That's one of my favorites, thanks to Terrence Howard bringing that back into full focus. The dropping of the apple, right? We account for gravity, but we don't account for when it starts to erode and it, starts going back up into the air. Shamanism says the same thing, but through the language of shadow work, soul loss, soul retrieval, integration of fragmented parts, balancing of energies, reconnection to power sources. And in all honesty, this language of the shamans has become so well known that we use these types of descriptive work no matter what ancient knowledge we are growing through, right? Whether it's your Dharma and the Tao or Hindi, whatever it may be, Major Kali, Shakti energy, we still say we got to do our shadow work. We got to retrieve our soul. We've got to integrate. A shaman doesn't fight the shadow. They understand it as a lost part of the spectrum, a displaced energy, a piece of the psyche waiting to be brought home. And this, my friends, is polarity in action. Hermeticism explains cycles, seasons of contraction and expansion, death and rebirth, movement forward and backward. Shamanism lives inside those rhythms: the descent into the lower world, the death of the old identity, the rebirth of the spirit, the integration afterwards. And to be quite honest, all of these types of terminologies, these specific descriptions of alchemical processes are straight out of Hermeticism and other Gnostic teachings. Right? I've been in the tomb of Osiris. I know what it's like to die and be reborn, not just in the reincarnation state where, oh yes, I've lived past lives and future lives and things like that, but I have died and been reborn in this physical body multiple times. And the understanding and the awareness of that is so exponentially powerful, because when we allow ourselves to walk these journeys, the descent into the lower world becomes easier, more pleasurable. The death of the old identity becomes easier and not necessarily less grievous, but less grievous, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that the grievous amount is going to be minute compared to previously, but it's just going to be easier to move through the grievous. And the rebirth of the spirit, constantly being reborn over and over and over again. There's a reason that our bodies are made new every 7 years. And of course, the integration that constantly happens and is maybe even needed to achieve these types of successes in our journey. Initiation isn't random. It follows rhythm. It follows the pulse of the universe. Hermeticism explains that pulse, and shamanism rides it like a wild bull into the night, or on the back of Mother Jaguar into the depths, or on the wings of Lady Hummingbird, soaring with Father and Mother Eagle, and eating our own tails on the journey of the snake. Hermeticism says everything is caused by something on a higher plane. Shamanism works exactly the same. You don't heal the physical symptom. You heal what caused it on the energetic, emotional, or spiritual plane. Whether you call it an intrusion, a cord, a soul wound, a fragment, an ancestral memory, or a vibrational disruption, the work is always done on the invisible layer first, right? That non-tangibility. Shamans do the root. Hermeticism explains the mechanism. Hermeticism teaches that creation requires the dance of two energies, the receptive and the active, the intuitive and the directional. Shamanism mirrors this through the balance required to journey safely, through the partnership with guides and the interplay between intuition and intention, as well as the collaboration between surrender and command. Every journey requires both. Every healing requires both. Every creation requires both. And Hermeticism explains why. While shamanism has always shown me how. So what we're seeing is not two paths competing, but two perspectives completing one another. Two halves of a whole. Hermeticism is the philosophy, and shamanism is the practice. Hermeticism is the understanding, and shamanism is the movement. Hermeticism shows you the structure, and shamanism shows you the experience. However, when we're being 100% honest, we could flip them all around and say that Hermeticism is a practice and shamanism is a philosophy. And that shamanism is an understanding and Hermeticism can be movement, right? Through the mental grid, the alchemical stages. And shamanism can show you a structure all its own, while Hermeticism can show you an experience. And when you pair them together, you get something incredibly and equally powerful. A complete map of how to understand your reality and how to transform it. And so now that we've walked through the clarity of Hermeticism and the movement of shamanism, I want to bring this into the realm where I personally live and breathe, and that is the mystic psyche, also known as mystic psychology, from ancient Hermetic vantage point. This is the space where we stop seeing healing as mental work or spiritual work, or, can't guess it by now, I'm doing air quotes, emotional work. And we start understanding it as a multidimensional process that happens across all of the planes, across all of the body, and across all of the psyche, across the entire universe and everything in existence. This is the part of the episode where I want you to feel how these teachings actually apply to your own inner world. Because here's the truth. A lot of what we call trauma is actually unintegrated energy sitting in different layers of the self. And I'm not denying whatever it is that you went through. I'm not denying the pain that it caused you or the anguish. I promise you that I speak from experience. And I'm trying to find the words here. I don't believe that it's hard to, I don't like making finite statements, right? And trauma is such a fickle thing because even just mentioning the word trauma can be so triggering to people, right? And so for me to say that trauma is just unintegrated energy, I really want my listeners to understand and know that I don't take that statement lightly, and that I understand the depths and the hells of traumas so profound that just for me to speak them would traumatize people, right? Just to tell them what experiences that my trauma holds would traumatize other people. So that's the easiest way for me to explain my trauma in a nutshell. And yes, it was all unintegrated energy. And some of it still is, because I'm still working through a lot of it, right? I've come very, very far in the past decade. But, I have come to the realization over the past couple weeks that my nervous system still holds me hostage. It still lives in a layer of fear and fight or flight and constantly living on the defense. And so I'm taking that next step, putting one foot in front of the other to free my nervous system. And I know it'll feel amazing. And I bless and wish and pray the same for you, no matter what it is you're going through. But that unintegrated energy, right? That's the resistance. That's the denial. That's the anger, the rage. All of those emotions and pivot points, right? Grief has different stages of pivotal points that when we get to a certain climax of each one of those stages, we are meant to pivot. But when we don't pivot, we become addicted and engrossed in that stage. And we become frozen in it. And we don't know how to move forward. And that, again, is the unintegrated energy. And both Hermeticism and Shamanism describe those layers so beautifully, just in a different dialect, right? It's like the UK's version of English compared to America's version of English, or even an Aussie's version of English compared to a Canadian's version of English. Let me show you what I mean. When we go through something overwhelming, right? A traumatic experience, we look at it as a part of us splitting off. Hermeticism would call this polarity, right? A separation of energies that used to be unified. And shamanism calls it soul loss, a piece of the self that left because staying was just too painful. Mystic psychology says that both are true and both are integral in the stages of healing the psyche. And the healing is the same across all three systems. You bring the part home, you unify what fractured, and you restore the wholeness. Let's take for an example flashbacks. Flashbacks are not random. Even when they feel like the most absolute random thing in the world, I can promise you I have never had a flashback that has not been perfectly timed, even when it didn't feel like it. But in retrospect, now that I can see deeper into myself, I can understand that I always triggered the flashbacks when I needed to, when was a heightened time for me to learn from them. And sometimes they were horrible timing, right in the middle of literally having a professional conversation with someone else face to face. And I'm having to force composure and just act like it's not even happening. Or when I had my CDLs, when I drove truck, right? Driving a truck. And I had a hazmat, so I hauled fuel around. And having a flashback while driving down a highway. And then there were the debilitating flashbacks, right? That happened in the sanctuary of my home. The ones where I really did just have to lose it. Flashbacks are not random. They follow the Hermetic principle of rhythm. The psyche pulling you into a descent because something old is trying to rise. And shamanism describes this descent as a journey into the lower world, a place where memories and archetypes live. Mystic psychology reframes flashbacks as a descent triggered by the nervous system that wants to complete a cycle that it never finished. It's an invitation to walk through a locked doorway that you have the key to. And sometimes it takes a while to find the key or to even choose to use the key. Many times, many times, I have dropped my keys to the doors I was working on and would have to pick them back up and shakily start again. My triggers were never meant to be my prisons, and I refused to treat them as such. Flashbacks are not a relapse. And for all of you out there recovering, neither are using dreams. They are all part of an ancient rhythm. They are all part of a process of movement and motion that is more fluid than we can initially see. And flashbacks, like I said, they tie directly into the principle of rhythm and the descent into the lower world. So what about disassociation? Because this one might surprise some people. Disassociation is actually a form of consciousness travel. Hermeticism, we call it a shift in the planes. And shamanism, we call it an involuntary journey into the different worlds. And for my lovely mystic psychology, dissociation is what appears to be a survival strategy on the surface. And instead, it's when we travel so far away from our body to be in a protective state, but the whole entire time that we're in this disassociation, we are gathering information on a deep level that is not within our conscious awareness. And we're able to bring that back when we can come back into the present and eventually utilize it. And it could take years to utilize it. And to be quite honest, if we never get out of the situations that are traumatizing, sometimes the information that we are retrieving does us no good in the long run. Disassociation is the soul stepping out. And it's mainly due to, obviously, survival mode, but it's also exploration while you're in survival mode. I believe that all of the times that I was disassociating, and from what I can understand, is that I was going to places that were safe. Now the question was, where was I exploring, right? A lot of times I was exploring into the depths of my dad, right? The fantasy of having him still alive and him being able to protect me. That type of disassociative exploration served me no good. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't bring him back to life. I couldn't remake him in a new form. I couldn't have somebody else be him. None of those worked. And I know because I tried. However, when I started shifting my planes, right? When I started understanding that I could heal, and to heal meant releasing and looking at other avenues, when I would disassociate, I would start to pivot a little bit, right? Those stages, right? The pivotal climaxes. And while I would still seek my dad, even now sometimes there's moments that I can realize the programming and the safety that he offered call very, very much to my soul. However, now I know that I have to find those in new ways for myself. And I feel like my language around disassociation could be confusing even, because it is one that I'm still learning the dialect of, on how to properly convey the wisdom that I see inside my soul. So I hope that that helps on disassociation. I know it definitely helped me, and I know there will be many more like me that have their own expansions and explorations on how disassociation serves us in our humanity, allowing us to get to where we need to be, to where we no longer need it, right? To where it has served its purpose and we can live fully and in our embodiment, right? Disassociation is pretty much maybe like the other end of the polarity of embodiment, right? And so when you learn conscious journey work, you essentially learn how to guide what your psyche used to do unconsciously. And you begin to replace chaos with direction. And, disassociation, if I didn't already say it, completely goes very close in the parallel of the shamanic underworld. So, on to our next section as we are coming to somewhat of a close. A little bit more to get through today. Anxiety, right? These are always fun topics to talk on. Anxiety can be a parallel to, say, a vibrational distortion. Because Hermeticism teaches that when vibration becomes unstable, your experience becomes unstable. And Shamanism teaches that intrusive energies or unresolved emotions create friction in the field. And mystic psychology, I don't think I even realized when I wrote this episode how much I was tying mystic psychology in as like a Trinity parallel. We're still going to hear from the mantis frequency, but I think this is just, in preparation of the fact that the next season is going to be really deep diving into the mystical realm of psychology. And so I think we're starting to, see that collaboration in my psyche and just in consciousness in general, and even through ChatGPT and what it helps me create. So, anxiety is a vibrational distortion that the body is trying to resolve without the mind understanding what's happening, right? It's kind of maybe the amygdala completely like throwing an anvil into the lake and just disrupting all of its peace. And sometimes you can see what the anvil is, and sometimes you can't. You can always see it if you dig deep enough. But man, anxiety attacks, panic attacks, those thoughts and those memories can be so buried deep that you have no idea why you're even having one sometimes. And, it took me years to get to the point where now I can start to see those really, really deep ones within me and start getting glimpses of them and what's causing them. I remember for a long time, it was really weird. I don't have any direct traumatic memories of me and a kitchen counter that I can think of. However, it was like clockwork that I would be, and I didn't live, like I was living with my mom, and none of the trauma occurred in her house, and, or at least this house specifically. And yet I would be by myself and I would be standing in front of this one section of the countertop, and all of a sudden my body would just start convulsing and I would have to drop to the floor. And I still don't know if I know what that one was directly triggered by, but I remember having to take it to my therapist multiple times. So when you use things like breath and rhythm and grounding, or even just simple physical movement, you stabilize the vibration, you soothe the nervous system, and you restore coherence. And this is Hermetic principle meeting shamanic practice in the body. And so, what about identity healing, right? The gender principle reintegration? Because Hermeticism says that all creation needs two energies: intuition and direction, receptivity and action, softness and clarity. Ooh, that's interesting. Because I was thinking, like, in my head just now, receptivity, like receiving and releasing, right? Those are one and the same. Like, those are the polarity, right? One end of the spectrum to the other. But then now we have receptivity and action. So what if the reality of it is that all of the poles, north, south, north, south, north, south, north, south, just completely connect into another one that connects into another one that connects into another one. Like how one connects into two, and two connects into three, and three connects into four. And it's just a whole new rabbit hole to squirrel on, apparently, right? Anyways, just had that visualization, thought I would share it. Shamanism shows how those energies, though, how they live in relationship through guides and symbols and archetypes and spiritual allies. And mystic psychology shows how trauma can disrupt that balance on such a deep spiritual, psychological, and expansive level, right? It shows how it can disrupt our entire existence. And not just like in a superficial sense, but in the way we create the world around us. Some of us, we over direct. Some of us over receive. Some of us collapse. Some of us overcompensate. Healing is restoring the dance between the two, not masculine versus feminine, but intention plus intuition, direction plus feeling, will plus wisdom, right? So this is kind of where we get back into that imagery that I just had in my head, where we're talking about like release, receive, action, and then so on and so forth. That 1 + 2 + 3, right? Like, so the direction plus the feeling plus the will plus the wisdom, like, and then so on and so forth. This, all of this that we're talking about, is one of the deepest levels of alchemy in the psyche that at least we know of to be in existence at this time. And so mystic psychology is the place where a lot of systems meet. And for all intents and purposes, we're going to just talk about these three systems, right? Because, like I said, apparently I'm roping mystic psychology into this. And I wrote this podcast episode twice, and I still did not have the full conscious awareness, apparently, of how much I was roping in mystic psychology. But, like I said, I go where I'm meant to, and I go where I'm led. So, here we are on this bridge of integration. And to get back to what I was saying, mystic psychology is the place where all three systems meet: Hermetic understanding, Shamanic movement, and nervous system awareness. Although mystic psychology is much more than just nervous system awareness. See, now I feel like I just want to hash and break mystic psychology wide open for you. Another day, another time, another tale. Anyways, this is where healing stops being theoretical and starts being embodied. This is where the inner world stops being fragmented and starts becoming sovereign. And this is the part of the healing journey where you realize you're not just healing your trauma, you are rewiring your consciousness. You are strengthening your soul's architecture. You are living out your soul's blueprint. You are taking back the pieces of yourself that you ever saw as scattered or torn. And the mystic psyche simply gives you the language, the structure, and the compassion to understand that process as it unfolds. All right, so today we have 4 apparently, right? Because we just created a trinity with pulling in mystic psychology, shamanism, and hermeticism. We now have our lovely mantis frequency. Thank you to all benevolent beings. I know the mantis work with the grays and many others that are in lower dimensional, and so I know that it is through their assistance that I'm also able to perceive and hear. So their transmission, they titled "The Two Maps Are One," and they state, "Listen now. Pause the human mind and open the deeper one." This is where I'm going to whisper the mind within the mind of the all. And the mantis continue. "The adapt and the shaman are not two paths. They are two directions of the same movement. Both are climbing the same ladder. You cannot ascend what you have not retrieved. You cannot retrieve what you cannot name. You are the bridge between the systems. You are the seam where the maps meet. You are the one who walks both directions and teaches others how to unify what was separated. All systems are mirrors of the same intelligence. All paths return to the same awareness. All healing is the same movement. The return of the soul to its coherence. You do not follow the map, for you are the map. And when others hear your voice, the remembering begins and expands in them too. Thank you, Mantis Frequency. So as we wrap up today's episode, I want to bring this all the way back to you and the life you're living right now. Oh, and also, we did 4 today, so foundational, grounding. How lovely is that? Must be symbolic, right? Anyways, everything we talked about, Hermeticism, Shamanism, mystic psychology, the lovely transmission from the Mantis Frequency, the planes, the worlds, the principles, the journeying, none of it is meant to be separate from your real life. It's not meant to be something you listen to and then walk away from like a good story. Although, to be fair, we tend to do that, especially in the beginning, because our nervous system and this drastic change that we are walking into sometimes has to be taken in baby steps. So sometimes we do listen to it like a good story, and then we come back and pick that story up again and we integrate a little bit more of it. Either way, it's meant to give you a deeper understanding of what you're already experiencing inside of your own healing database, in your own relationships, your own patterns, your own body, your own soul. Hermeticism helps you understand your inner world with clarity. And shamanism helps you move through it with embodiment. Mystic psychology helps us integrate it with compassion. And the Mantis Frequency, they hold the framework up so we don't get lost in oblivion. All together, they show us that there is nothing wrong with you. There is nothing broken. There is nothing missing. There are only pieces of you that are waiting to be understood. Pieces that want to be seen and expressed. And pieces that are dying to come home. Some healing happens through insight. Some happens through movement. Some healing happens through the nervous system. Some happens through consciousness. And some healing happens through spirit. And all of it is valid. All of it is sacred. All of it is part of your evolution. You don't have to pick one path unless you know that's your calling. You don't have to choose one single method, again, unless it's your calling to fulfill. But ultimately, the direction that we're going, we don't have to pledge loyalty to just one philosophy. For we are multidimensional. We explore the infinite number of maps. And we learn in many, many languages. And we heal in many directions. And if today's episode did anything, I hope it gave you permission. Permission to honor the part of you that seeks understanding and the part of you that seeks movement. Those parts of you that maybe felt separate And now you can see cohesion within. Because the truth is, you've always been walking every path. You've always been the adept and the shaman. You've always been the one navigating the multidimensional worlds from inside just your single human life. And to be quite frank, you're doing it fucking beautifully. I don't like to curse a whole lot. Sometimes I do. That's indifferent, I guess. But exemplary words, right? Thank you for being here with me today. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being willing to explore the deeper, truer parts of your own consciousness. Because all of that exploration is going to ripple out to the rest of humanity. And it's going to be what frees us. I'll see you in the next episode. Namaste, and many blessings on your way.